Hello, everybody. I'm Professor Simon Crew, and in my professional career, I've focused on two areas, two disciplines. One is in business, and associated with that, the other is in psychology. And for the last 18 years, I've been doing research on personality traits in executives and in the community as a whole. But what I want to do today is I wanted to talk about psychology. Why psychology? Not as an academic subject locked away in textbooks, but as a practical tool for navigating everyday life. Psychology asks one of the oldest and most important questions. Why do humans think, feel, and act the way that they do? And the more we understand that, the more equipped we are to make sense of others and ourselves. Whether we realize it or not, every decision we make, every friendship we maintain, every conflict we encounter, and every dream we pursue depends on how our minds work. So psychology isn't just relevant for therapists, teachers, or researchers. It's relevant for all of us. So what is psychology? It's the scientific study of the mind and behavior. Notice the word scientific. Psychology isn't about guessing or relying on intuition or simply asking people why they behave as they do. Because here's the curious truth. Much of human behavior is driven by processes we don't consciously notice. Habits, biases, emotions, memories, and biological mechanisms that are shaped across millions of years of evolution. So psychology is fundamentally an attempt to reveal what is hidden. It observes behavior, measures it, compares patterns across people and cultures, and constructs theories that explain why those patterns exist. It also builds interventions, ways to change our behavior for the better. So why should anybody care about understanding the mind? I think there are three main reasons. Firstly, it's to understand others. We humans are social creatures. We live in families, communities, companies, and nations. Every social interaction, from parenting to leadership to conflict resolution, becomes easier when we understand how other people think and what motivates them. Secondly, it's to understand ourselves. We all carry emotions we don't fully explain, beliefs we can't trace back to their origins, and habits that either serve us or sabotage us. Psychology gives us tools to observe our own minds and make adjustments. And thirdly, it's to help improve the world around us. Schools, workplaces, hospitals, courts, media, environments, even digital platforms are all built around assumptions about human behavior. The better those assumptions are, the more accurate, the better our institutions function. So, how does how do we understand the mind? How does psychology as a discipline work? Well, there are a number of different ways in which psychologists try to understand and make sense of the world around us. Firstly, observation and naturalistic research. We simply watch. We observe children playing. We observe passengers navigating airports. We observe shoppers choosing their products or teams negotiating problems. Observing behavior without interfering in it helps us to reveal patterns. For example, when researchers are studying playground dynamics, they've often identified subtle rules of cooperation and conflict that mirror adult workplaces more closely than we might expect. Secondly, we use experiments. They help us to isolate causes. For instance, if we change the color of a room, does it affect stress? If we alter the framing of a question, do people change their answer? For example, classic work by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed how simple wording could lead people into predictable decision biases, reshaping economics and public policy. Thirdly, we can use brain and biological measures. Advances in neuroscience allow psychologists to peek into the brain using tools like EEG and fMRI. This helps link thoughts and feelings to neural activation. For example, researchers studying empathy found that when we watch somebody experiencing pain, our brains simulate a smaller version of that same experience, a biological basis for compassion, if you will. We can use interviews and self-reports. Sometimes the best way to understand a person is just to ask. Surveys and interviews allow people to describe their motivations, fears, their beliefs, and their experiences. Although people can sometimes misinterpret or misremember their own minds, self-reports reveal subjective words that biology alone cannot explain. And fifth, we can use longitudinal studies, track people over years or even decades. They show how personality stabilizes, how relationships evolve, how childhood experiences shape adult well-being. One famous study from Harvard followed participants for over 80 years and concluded that the strongest predictor of happiness and health was the quality of our relationships. So, what has psychology actually discovered that changes the way we live and how we live? Firstly, humans are not fully rational. We like to think of ourselves as logical thinkers, yet we regularly misjudge risks, we value immediate rewards over long-term benefits, and we fall for cognitive biases. From advertising to politics, entire industries are built on understanding how predictable and irrational we can be. Secondly, emotions shape our thinking. Rather than being separate from reasoning, emotions are embedded within decision-making. Fear sharpens threat detection. Anxiety tunes the mind towards uncertainty. Curiosity fuels learning. Love sustains cooperation. Without emotion, logic alone would be paralyzing. Personality matters. Traits like introversion, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism are not just labels. They predict how we work, whom we connect with, how we handle stress. Understanding personality differences helps resolve misunderstandings, especially in relationships and workplaces. Fourth, development leaves a footprint. Early childhood shapes language, attachment, and emotion regulation. Adolescence reshapes risk-taking and identity. And contrary to older views, adulthood continues to involve psychological growth, not just decline. And fifth, the social world influences the individual. If you've ever behaved differently in a group than alone, psychology already has a name for that. Conformity, social norms, peer influence, prejudice, and belonging are powerful forces. Our sense of identity is built partly from within, but also from the cultures we inhabit. So, where does all this matter in everyday life? Well, the answer's clearly everywhere. It affects parenting. Psychology explains why children test boundaries, how they learn, how emotional regulation develops. In relationships, it explains communication patterns, attachment styles, conflict cycles, and why apologies can repair trust. In education, it helps design classrooms that motivate curiosity rather than anxiety. It explains memory, attention, and how different students learn. In health, psychology improves pain management. It helps people quit harmful habits, and it supports mental health treatment. In organizations, it informs leadership, teamwork, motivation, negotiation, and organizational culture. In technology, it explains why social media is so engaging and sometimes addictive, and how design choices influence behavior. In law and public policy, psychology research informs eyewitness reliability, jury decision making, crime prevention, and rehabilitation. And even in consumer behavior, it explains why we prefer certain brands, why sales techniques work, and why we pay more for products that tell a story. The more we understand psychology, the better we become at interpreting others. So many conflicts are rooted not in malice, but in misunderstanding, different needs, fears, communication styles, and stress responses. Psychology teaches us to ask, what might this person be trying to achieve? What are they afraid of? What information are they missing? What pressures are they under? This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it contextualizes. And context is the first step towards empathy. Psychology also turns the mirror inward. It asks uncomfortable questions. Why do certain situations trigger anxiety? Why do we procrastinate? Why do we sometimes sabotage our own happiness? Why do we repeat patterns in relationships? Why do beliefs persist even when evidence changes? By asking these questions, psychology provides tools for growth. It helps us recognize blind spots, manage emotions, reshape our habits, build our resilience, and make decisions aligned with who we want to become. Self-awareness is not self-criticism, it's clarity, and clarity opens a door to change. So, psychology matters because the mind matters. Our thoughts shape our actions shape our relationships, and our relationships shape the world we live in. Understanding psychology won't stop us from being human, flawed, emotional, contradictory, but it helps us to become more intentional, more empathetic, and more capable of living meaningful lives. In short, psychology is the study of what makes us human. And what could be more relevant than that?